Hi everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. Come for the tools and stay for the developer flexibility. So a rather elaborate name, but I'm looking forward to talking to you more about what we've been doing in Neo4j developer tools. Before I dive into the full content, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I only joined Neo4j back towards the beginning of the year, so I've been here for a few months. I'm based in the UK, and for most of my career, I've worked in the graph space, so working in entity resolution, network analytics for financial crime prevention, that kind of thing. Doing that work, I have been a long time Neo4j user, and I'm pretty excited to now be the product manager for developer tools. And the reason I joined is I love the tooling, and I'm really excited about making that tooling even better. So I want to give you a kind of a view of what our mission is within DevTools. So DevTools is the area I'm responsible for, and it covers at the moment Neo4j Desktop, which I think you'll have heard a lot of people talk about, and Neo4j Browser. And Browser was, of course, the original UI for Neo4j Desktop, and is part of what makes the experience with Neo4j quite special in terms of the interpretability and how you can query the graph. So as I mentioned, our journey is very much to serve developers, and it ranges across kind of the spectrum from whether you're completely new to graph and or Neo4j, so we can kind of help you understand, get started with Cypher and more, start to get more complex kind of queries written, helping you through your initial data loads and queries with your own data so you can realize the benefits of using Neo4j, right through to building skills. And we have more advanced features in the in browser, particularly to help you learn the syntax and how things work, all the way through to being what we sometimes term a Neo4j ninja, where maybe you're using Neo4j as a seamless part of your development workflow, and being super productive. So this is kind of how I see it in an obligatory sort of arrows / browser diagram of nodes and relationships. So the primary purpose of desktop is to get you up and running with Neo4j locally and to help you manage your DBMSs, which is kind of a bit of a contrast to Aura, where things are kind of managed for you. With desktop for your local deployments, you can kind of manage and control those things as you need to. So it's a good way to learn about that if you've got that kind of need. And then browser is primarily about the richest Cypher editing experience, visualizing query results, be they in tables or graphs, and being a good place to learn about Cypher. And then secondarily, a way to administer your database. And we have kind of emerging tooling that will be coming in a few months to kind of help you with that as the kind of more primary use case. So I've got some slides here, but I'm going to hope that the demo gods are going to be kind to me. And I'm just going to rattle through these things that are the new features, and I'm going to kind of go hands-on and show you how they work within the respective tools. So I'm going to cover most of the functionality I've got in these slides, which people can refer to after if they want to. So a few notable things that we've delivered in the last few months. Access to sample projects directly from within desktop. So you can get up and running with starter projects with a dump file, some queries, maybe some guides for a particular domain, be it a Twitter trolls project, for example, or the Paradise Papers. A really good place to kind of get started. We've introduced multi-database UI support for versions 4 of the database. So it's been some time coming to desktop, but we now have the beginnings of support for that within the desktop UI. And then in browser, there are 3 things that I'm going to talk you through. So one is the new Cypher editor, which we launched not long after I joined at the beginning of this year, which I announced, which brings you some kind of powerful features. So we've replaced the existing editor with something that's kind of a more modern standard now. So we'll talk through some of the examples of the things you can do there within that. We'll go through all the shortcuts and things, some of the shortcuts in the demo session. We've introduced a thing called a reusable frame, which allows you to, as a long requested feature that complements existing workflows. So you can kind of go into an existing result frame that you've run, maybe fix a typo, or just iteratively refactor your query until you've got it doing exactly what you want without having kind of tons of result frames stream through. And then finally, kind of talking to more of the kind of left-hand end of that journey where we're serving people, we've improved the guides that come with browser, or rather the way in which we surface guides, so they're easier to consume and you can kind of focus on the content and the queries rather than them kind of being merged together. So that's what I'm going to demo. And I'm going to give you a demo that's in the context of just a hobby project that I was doing. So rather than give you the usual movies demo, I'm going to maybe be brave, maybe it's foolish if it doesn't kind of work out the way I want it, but I'm going to give you a demo looking at some data I was doing as a hobby project, kind of just to load data into Neo4j and kind of see how I could understand the structure of that data. So this demo, don't take into it kind of like best ways of writing Cypher or even that some of the things I'm doing are the absolute best idea. I don't profess to be an expert in that subject, but I thought I'd give you an example of kind of things I was doing kind of very quickly to kind of use the tooling and show you how some of those features I've talked about help in that. So the kind of problem I'm going to be talking you through is I'm going to be fetching data from the UK Environment Agency on river flows and river levels. And the inspiration really for this hobby project was in my spare time, I like to go out on the water and it's important for me to understand how fast rivers are flowing. And these maps you can see on the right are pretty neat. They show you monitoring stations and either current water levels or flow rates. But I thought it would be pretty neat to kind of try and combine that with actual river data on the shapes of the rivers and maybe come up with some kind of river heat map to do that. So as with all hobby projects, this hobby project is not finished. So, or rather I should say at least 50% of my hobby projects is not quite finished yet. And I'm not sure it will be, but I'll show you kind of where I've got to on it and show you some of the features that I developed along the way. So I'm going to switch across to Neo4j Desktop and talk you through some of the kind of features that we brought in the recent releases. I'm not going to go over everything because I'm sure we'd run out of time. So I'm going to start off, I've already created a project that I've called Nodes 2021 DevTools Demo, and I've already created a DBMS in here just to save a little bit of time for the demo. And I've done things like if I click on this DBMS, which happens to be 426, I ran this yesterday before the latest version, 4.3 was out. We can see that I've installed the APOC plugin because that's one of the things I'm going to be using. And I actually went in, set a few settings around APOC to allow the procedures to run and allow me to do some data imports. So those are all the kind of operations I've done within Neo4j Desktop. And then one of the features I was talking about earlier is the ability to create a new database. So I'm going to create a new database called River, which will create that within and make it available to me within browser to start using. You can see here, if I click on it, it's a completely empty database. In prep for this yesterday, I kind of ran through creating my nodes and relationships just to check everything was working. So this, if everything goes catastrophically wrong, is going to be kind of my backup database to go to. So I'm going to also show you, so now is a good point for me to launch into browser. So I'm going to do that from here, and I'm actually going to open up the Canary builder browser, which is not out yet. So there are going to be some things in here that you see that haven't been released yet. They're going to be due out next week. They're mostly sort of small UI tweaks that we think improve what you can do, especially around reusable frames and layouts of buttons. Neo4j Browser is now open. I've opened it in the context of desktop. I'm going to switch across to the Rivers database that I just created, and we can see here on the left-hand side, there's nothing in there. It's empty at the moment. What I'm going to do is show you now the guides that appear within browser. So we've created a new holding place for some of the built-in guides. So the much-loved movies graph guide, which you can launch into here and go through and kind of run some of the commands. Now, I won't do that for this example because I don't want to start filling up my Rivers database with Tom Hanks and other actors. This is just to show you some of the guides that are available out of the box with this new guide command. And so they can also be run like this. And it's worth saying for people who still have old play invoke guides, we have kept those guides there in this format. And you can continue to use those. So we've not yet deprecated that feature, though we would encourage people to start using the new guides format. And one of the big benefits of the new guides format is if I just do something like the world's simplest Cypher query and return one, because one of the problems with the old guides is they would disappear out from your frame. So if you were doing that a few times, if I rerun another return one, the guide will quickly disappear from the bottom. So there were ways to solve that by pinning it at the top. And you kind of have frames move under the guides, but it wasn't the neatest solution. So now you can use your guides by having them pinned to the left-hand side and move through them as you please. In this demo, though, I'm not going to talk about movies. I'm going to talk about my example rivers project. So I've got a guide that I've just pulled together here with some of the Cypher commands that I'm running for this quick demonstration. So in this guide, it's created much like guides that anyone who's created a guide before will be used to. These are created in ASCII doc and then converted that can be served up in this UI here. In this example, I'm calling it from a URL to load it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load in the UK river data, which is represented as points connected to the next points. That's going to be my first step. So to assist that loading process, the first thing I'm going to do is create an index on that. So I can either kind of click on the text in the guide here, or if it's something I just want to run immediately, I can click that through there and see the executed command. And the next thing I'm going to do is load all the line string representations from a file that represents I think it's the rivers in England, in the UK. Now this is going to take about 80 seconds to run through. It's a reasonable amount of data, so this gives me a good point to talk to you about some of the things we can do with reusable frames and the different keyboard shortcuts we can do with the editor. So because I don't have the best memory in the world, I've given myself a cheat sheet of some of the commands that I find particularly useful. And some of them I'm committing to memory, and some of them I'm kind of starting to learn as I use the editor. So in the reusable frame, what we can do is, even when this query is running, I can go in and see the entirety of the query here. Whereas kind of users who use Neo4j Browser a couple of releases ago remember that the default behavior is sending that back to the top, to the main editor, so you can edit it. When you click away and move to a different frame, that collapses back. You can move between the different reusable frames and expand them and inspect what's going on. But we also have the facility, and this is something that's coming in the release next month, because we've been listening to users about how they use things. We still want users to have the facility to send things to the main editor. So if I hover on this thing, you'll see that I can command click on Mac. I think it's control click for Windows. I can still get the old behavior and send things to the main editor if I want to kind of have that flow. And that's what I'm going to do here to tell you a bit more about what this query is doing. So just to give you a feel for the file and what it's doing while it's running, I'm going to put a few of these things on new lines. So I'm going to put this first part of an epoch periodic iterate on a new line here. And then I'm going to comment out the last bit of my query, because I don't want to do kind of all the merging and the loading into the graph. And I just want to show you actually what the first part of the query is doing. And I'm going to remember, unlike I did in one of my practice sessions, to put a limit statement on here, so I don't explode the number of results that are returned. And fingers crossed, that is all going to work okay. So you can see now in the result frame below that my batch load has completed okay. It's given me enough time to talk through some of those features. And you can see here, these are the kind of river data that we're loading in. So these are kind of string representations of bits of the river in a JSON file. That's kind of a representation of the file I'm loading in. And then in here, we're kind of unwinding the points that exist within these lists, creating the points, and then creating links between them to the next points. Before I show you the next thing, though, I'm going to go back to the first page, and I'm going to set the second load command going. So this is a command that just loads a slightly different multi-line string representation. It's effectively the same kind of thing. But I can show you I can use Neo4j Browser to easily switch across to see the existing nearly million points that have been loaded. And I can kind of use the existing commands within Browser to have a look at that, maybe go full screen. And you can see here where we've made some changes to the layout. So kind of the window operations for the frames are now kind of in their own sections. And this has the benefit of giving us a lot more space for the reusable frame, so you have the full width available to write your queries. So I can make that full screen now, and I can see, this is an example of a section of river that's been loaded in at some points. As I've explained that, the second batch of river data has loaded in, and we can now see that I've got a bit over 2 million points within my data. So we're now at a good point to move on to the next stage of the demo. Right, so moving on to the next stage in the guide. The second thing I'm going to do is load in the stations where things like river levels are monitored for either flow rates or above average or low average settings. So same as the kind of making the points, I'm going to create an index on that. to allow the load to go on more quickly. And maybe what I'll do is I'll run a clear command because that other stuff is done now. I'm not too bothered about seeing it, and I can run the other stages. So the next stage is I'm going to load in, and I've done this as a multi-statement query. So I've got 3 different lines here. So the first 2 are parameters where I'm setting up a regular expression to kind of parse out some of the information for kind of how the data is structured in that JSON file, and then I'm fetching, possibly very unwisely, from a live URL here during the demo, and running that through here. So you can see that I think is now completed, and we should see that I now have some stations within my data that will have some information and some measures in there. And we can see that in browser we've got the kind of plethora of property keys that have been loaded, representing some of the measures we can get from that. So back to the guide, and hopefully you can see here it's very easy to kind of keep these guides in context, do things within browser, make use of the reusable frames to kind of rapidly iterate and demonstrate what is going on. The last part of the call is I'm going to fetch some station metadata, which I have stored. I can probably show it to you within, I can show you kind of all the files I've got here within the import directory of Neo4j desktop. I've already kind of pre-prepared some stations files with some metadata, and this was the river data that I loaded in earlier. So I'm going to run that, and that's going to pretty quickly import because there's only, I think, 4,000 or so stations, and it's setting a couple of properties. It's enriching my stations. I can kind of come and reload this frame here rather than spawn a new one. And I can see that as well as having some measures, it's also enriched it with some location data. So I know exactly where on the map those rivers are located. I'm going to take this opportunity to then show you a few more features because I've only touched on some of them in the Monaco editor. This is a reasonably straightforward query, and it's setting some properties loaded in from a file, but I'll use it as an opportunity to show you how we can do some things. I think I've already shown you how to kind of comment and uncomment, and what I'll do for this part of the demo is I'll bring on, find it on my other screen, I will bring on Keycaster so you can see the kind of shortcuts that I'm running. So here I can comment and uncomment things. I could also choose, if I was interested in commenting things, kind of like this, Command K, Command C, to kind of keep commenting out if I've got kind of many depths of commenting that I need to control, and then I can keep uncommenting kind of like that. So that's pretty neat. I can do things like delete an entire line very quickly. So I don't want to set this, it's not quite the right shortcut. It's Command Shift and K. I can delete a whole line. I can kind of undo that again. If I want to add cursors for some reason, so I want to, this is maybe not the best example, but I want to adjust kind of the indentation of these 2 lines. I could kind of tab these both in, or kind of tab them, kind of delete back and bring them back in. So that's kind of a really easy way of controlling things over multiple lines. And then we've got some useful find and replace functionality in here. So let's go to, let me bring up maybe one of my previous queries. I'll send it to the main editor using the command click shortcut. And I'll show maybe one of the examples where, what have I called something here? I've called something station ID. So maybe, and by the way, this is a warning here, warning me that there's kind of something going on here and not providing enough parameters. So just ignore that for the time being. But there's maybe some find and replace I want to do here. So I've got some really useful shortcuts for, I select something and then press Command D, I can go through and select the occurrences of station ID. Or if I want to kind of automatically select all of those, I can do Command F2 on my keyboard and it automatically selects them all. And maybe I want to abbreviate that to station ID, and I can quickly do that in there. And of course, if I want to have greater control and flexibility, I can always hit Command F to bring up a fairly familiar find dialog where I can configure lots of things like even using regexes or choosing replaces and kind of stepping through and doing all that kind of stuff. I'll share some final things. So sometimes in here, when I'm debugging queries, I might be putting a limit statement in somewhere, type properly. Probably go down here actually, and I can use commands like this. Sorry, wrong shortcut, to kind of move lines up and down, or I could do that. It makes less sense with all these lines here, but just to illustrate, I can kind of move lines up and down in my query. So it kind of really helps me manipulate things. So I think that's kind of most of the kind of key ones that I tend to use called out there. And if you want access to see the different shortcuts that you've got available to you, some pretty nice ones like copy with syntax highlighting that you can run as a command. So if you've got a query you want to share with somebody and you want to preserve the highlighting in your Google Doc or your Word doc or whatever it is, you can do that, copy with syntax highlighting, you paste that into a document and you'll have all the nice syntax highlighting preserved for you there. So that covers most of the things with the Monaco editor. Let's go back to my demo flow. I don't think there's too much more to do. So I think I was on step 2 there, and then I'll clear down, like I did before, I'll clear down my result frames. So we can start with fresh, and I'll run some of the queries to see if I was doing the kind of thing I was trying to do in my original kind of aspiration. So see if I can find, what I'm trying to do now is see if I can find some stations that are near rivers, because if there are some stations monitoring river levels, then hopefully they'll be near the stations because they're probably doing some samples. So let's run that query and see what that gives there. This might take just a little while to run. Again, I can kind of expand this query, kind of describe to you what's going on. I'm kind of creating a Cartesian product here, but it's kind of okay because I'm looking at using the spatial index, hopefully looking to use a spatial index to make this return in a reasonable amount of time and show which monitoring stations are near rivers. So there we go. So I can see I've got an ordered list of 10 results here where I can see there are a number of different station names that are quite close to rivers. So this is, as I mentioned, this is a hobby project that is not completed in its entirety, but I can show you some of the kind of next stages of where it's going. So there's more work to do on this project, but there is an example query here, and I can show you how this reasonably long query, we can bring it full screen here by clicking escape. What I've started doing here is using some of the APOC features to kind of expand paths. So kind of what I'm doing is I'm looking to find out points that have got measures on them. And I'm not going to run this query because I'm going to, in the interest of time, I want to talk about the future of developer tools and then kind of show you what's going on. Actually, let me, as a second thought, let's try that out. I'll run this query in the background and try and show you if it runs. So what I jumped a step ahead of stage, but here what I'm doing is I'm setting on the stations that monitor river levels, I'm taking the measures from them, a certain type of measure that represents the level, and putting that onto the nodes that represent the points on the rivers. The idea being that when I go to the next stage, for this kind of query that I'm trying to write, I can kind of put those levels that the rivers have or the flow rates onto the points, and then I can maybe start kind of chunking up the points of the rivers to say, actually, between these 2 points, it had a certain flow rate at the beginning or a certain level at the beginning and the end of a section of river. And I can start considering building up maybe some kind of heat map of rivers. So if I've run all the steps in here, this setting of the properties ran okay. I can then run this. I think from memory, I didn't give myself a prompt about how long it takes. It takes a short while, and I'll be able to return some line strings that have different measures sometimes at the ends of the string. So here I can see sections of rivers that have a measure. I think it's to do with kind of meters above a typical level for a river. I can kind of see a lot of them have the same at the beginning and the end, and then we'll probably find, well, maybe as I can say, this is a hobby project. There's probably kind of more debugging to be done here to kind of work out differences. You can see this one has differences at both ends. I'm of course just returning a sample of results there. So to wrap up, these are some of the kind of key things that we've been working on in developer tools. We have some, in the last few months, we've dropped in guides that make it easier to follow content on the left and right of the screen. We have these reusable frames that really kind of improve your development flow. We have things like the improved syntax highlighting that I hadn't mentioned, but makes it easier to understand kind of key tokens in your cipher so that string values and numeric values jump out on you from the screen so you can understand them. And we've kind of still got these flows where we can send things back to the editor and kind of operate pretty smoothly on them. So that really concludes my interactive demo. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes towards the end of my talk talking about some of the things that I'm thinking about as a product manager for developer tools in the next few months and longer than that on where the products are going. Just a few bullets to kind of references for me to talk to. But we're really, one of the things I'm really aware of and I really want to improve is improving the local development experience with Neo4j Desktop. So it does many things for many different people. Some use cases it addresses are kind of more pervasive than others, but I'm really keen on doubling down and improving the reliability and the usability for that need of getting up and running locally within your desktop environment. Ultimately, so you can get into Browser or Bloom or maybe some other graph app as quickly as possible without having to worry about the overhead of navigating Neo4j Desktop. So it's a great tool. It does a lot of things for you, and before joining Neo4j, I used Docker as my main way of kind of using the community edition. And I went back to using Docker the other day and I forgot kind of how easy it makes some of the things like installing plugins and quickly changing your conf file. So we just want to focus on making that experience even better. In Browser, we would like to continue focusing on making it the best Cypher editor experience possible. So we're looking at Monaco, I think, sets the foundation for many more great things we can do in terms of providing signature help for functions, maybe in time type checking so that you'll know you're typing the right argument. Inline help, they're all things that we can start to look at with that editor. So they're things we're looking at for the future roadmap. And we'd also like to bring Cypher closer to your development environment. So this is much more of a longer term goal and a thing we're starting to think about, but maybe we already have some kind of labs projects like this where you can maybe use a Cypher editor in your IntelliJ IDE, but maybe if we could bring some of the goodness of what's in Browser into your development environment, be that, I don't know, a Jupyter Notebook or something else, looking at those kind of things we can do to bring that goodness to you. And then more generally, looking at the smoothness of the interactions we have between all of our applications. So you can seamlessly move maybe between Bloom and Browser and looking at some of those kind of things. And then finally, we're always looking to improve the experience and not just be acceptable, but to provide you with a development experience that delights. So one thing I didn't mention is we introduced something called Canary, and I can show you that quickly in the UI if it's been hidden to some people. So in the sidebar here that I expand, we have now a little kind of bell icon that talks to you about some of the things that we've delivered in releases. You can click on it and kind of see a summary of the things that are new, and you can kind of follow the links to get to a full web page to more easily view it. But you can also send feedback and tell us what you'd like to see, annoyances you have, and things you'd like improved. So I'd urge people to kind of use that mechanism to let us know what you think about the product, and we'll do our best to kind of triage that and kind of focus on the things that are the most pervasive that help them make things easier for you. So that exists for both Browser and Neo4j Desktop.